and everything else. So very good. We can start this wonderful panel. So thank you once more again to Andreas Bummel, the Executive Director of Democracy Without Borders, an NGO that I know very well. And we're going to talk about their wonderful work on global governance that they are doing throughout this panel. And welcome also to Mrs. Kuo, the President of the Taiwanese or Taiwan Digital Diplomacy Association, a wonderful enterprise as well that is promoting democracy in Taiwan and elsewhere, and we're going to hear from her about the wonderful work that they're doing across the planet. Today's panel is about how we innovate democracy. This part is a session, or the last digital session of our Freedom Marathon. There is a 3-day event digitally we've launched as Atlas to tackle 3 major pillars that we think today's democracies have to face. The first one is how to protect freedom fighters and democracy abroad. And this was the topic that we tackled on Wednesday with great speakers like from Venezuela, Hong Kong, Belarus, and so on. Yesterday, instead, we worked on how to hold democracies accountable, because let's remember, it's easy to look outside. It's more difficult to keep ourselves, meaning people that live in democracies, accountable to protect and keep a democratic level high and at high standards. And today, we instead look at the future. So once more, thank you for joining me on this panel about the future of democracy and how we can innovate democracy together. In terms of housekeeping, this meeting is recorded, so it's going to be uploaded later on several channels. We are live on Facebook, so we're going to receive a lot of questions there, and my team will relay them in the chat. But for those that are in the Zoom meeting, feel free to ask questions as well, and we're going to be sure to pick up on them throughout the event. So in terms of the opening question, and I would maybe ask Mrs. Kuo to begin. And my first question is, what are the biggest innovation you have seen in the last years on democracies? And you can obviously pick on Taiwan, but also I know that you work outside of Taiwan. So all over the planet, tell us a bit about the innovation that we see in the democratic space and how we can learn more and adopt them elsewhere.
Okay, let me start. I think, hello everyone. I think the biggest innovation in the past 1 year, unfortunately, what I see is from the pandemic, because the pandemic has kind of changed the way, like for Taiwanese government at least, changed the way to show our friendliness to the government from many countries. They also want to build connection with other countries because they are all locked down in their own country now. So all the government around the world, they are seeking for new methods to build connection with the international world. And because pandemic was, even now, pandemic is still the most concerned topic. So a lot of government are working on building relationship with other countries by donating masks or by donating vaccine to other countries. And so because we are doing digital diplomacy, and you can also see many campaigns started from the donation of masks or donation of vaccine. You can see that many politicians, they post or they tweet on their social media to thank someone or to thank some countries who are willing to help them or to show their willingness to build connection with other countries. And for Taiwan's perspective, we can see our government also try to build more connection with younger generation, because they focus more on digital promotion for their policy since last year, because we cannot hold offline events now. So the government, they emphasize the power of digital more than before. And in the past 1 year, our government has built a lot of chatting groups. They try to build different chatting groups and engage with different generation and different target audience, because they think the best way to promote their policy is to build direct channels with their supporters. For example, our president, she has her own Line group. Line is the most common communication application in Taiwan. She has her own chatting groups, and she can deliver message to all her supporters. It just happened last year, and also you can see some government sector, they started to cooperate with each other more often than before, because the global situation has become more and more complicated. So cross-sector cooperation has to work together to face the environment, because of the environment is changing. So I think this is what I see the biggest innovations in the past 1 year from Taiwanese perspective. Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mrs. Kuo. And first of all, thank you for giving this 360-degree overview of what you're seeing. And I'm going to go now to Andreas, but then I'm going to jump again on you and asking you especially one or two examples, very concrete examples of things that you have seen working very well in Taiwan in this space. But now let's move to Andreas. Again, I would call it almost an old friend. We have been in conference together for long. Andreas has been spearheading for a long time the effort to create a more effective global governance through the UN and through other means all over the planet. So I want to ask you the same question, Andreas. What do you think, or what do you see as the biggest innovation in democracy in the last few years? And obviously, if you want to also tell us, what do you think is missing in this space as well?
Thank you very much. I'm so happy to be here and that you invited me to speak at this panel. And I understand you already had some very good days on these other subjects. On your question, I would look at it a little bit from an institutional procedural perspective. And I would also have to stretch the time span a bit longer than just the last few years. Because in this space of institutional and procedural innovations, I think the pace is relatively slow, unfortunately. But there are at least two things I would like to highlight. And one is the European Citizens Initiative, which is a transnational instrument that became operational in around 2010, 2011, which is included in the Lisbon Treaty on the European Union. And allows citizens to put legislative proposals in front of the European Commission. And there have been already a couple of successful initiatives, for instance, on the right to water, which means that water should remain in the public domain as a public service. There's been another initiative that has been successful to ban glyphosate, and another one most recently, for instance, to end provides European citizens a possibility to take direct influence on the agenda setting and perhaps legislation at the EU level. So I consider that a huge innovation. Of course, procedures and mechanisms of direct democracy of this kind exist at the national level a lot, I mean, by now. But this is, especially because it is transnational, I think, a real important innovation, even if a lot remains to be done to make it more effective and stronger. And the second thing I would like to highlight is the it's not a new approach, but there is been in the political space a stronger reliance on this, namely of citizen assemblies, which are composed of randomly chosen citizens, but a representative group of citizens who would come together on a specific subject issue and provide recommendations. That has happened on climate policy in France, on equality in Ireland. There's been one in Australia, and there's another one now that is being prepared in connection with the climate talks in Glasgow that would form a global citizens assembly. So I would consider these two things real interesting innovations.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I was a bit delayed, and I saw, just to jump on what you said, a very interesting question arrived already through the Zoom, saying these are very cool ideas, but often the barriers to participate are huge, immense. And the European Citizen Initiative, I think, is the perfect example a few succeed, but most do not succeed, because 1 million signatures from 28 different countries requires an investment, a monetary investment that is very considerable, and also it has to be done, if I'm correct, in a 1 year time period. So do you think, I mean, it's definitely a positive development, but do you think this is enough?
No, this is not enough. I mean, of course, as I indicated, a lot needs to be improved, and I can see in the chat a remark about other institutions, governments, parliaments, cherry picking from recommendations, which is exactly what's been happening in many cases, but not in all cases. So I do not look at citizens' assemblies, however, as a replacement of existing institutions like elected parliaments. I would look at them as very good and useful additions in a set, in a toolbox of democracy. And nonetheless, it is true that perhaps recommendations should be more binding than just being at the full discretion in the follow-up process, like it is the case in the European Citizens Initiative as well. So the European Commission can choose whether or not they would initiate legislation or do anything, and there's been a lot of debate whether those initiatives should even be discussed at the European Parliament level and so on. So I would look at it, it is innovations that are in an ongoing process of being reviewed and hopefully improved. Well, so yes, I guess that's a thing. Democracy, that's perhaps the bottom line, is a process that is in an eternal, movement of being improved and reviewed, and that's important to realize.
I fully agree, Andreas, and that's why I want to jump now back to Mrs. Kuo, where actually in Taiwan, where innovation in democracy is actually happening. In a very short time, Taiwan became one of the most successful and democratic countries on the planet. So first of all, kudos for the work of you and your people and your government on this topic. Mrs. Kuo, you probably know a lot of tools, as you mentioned before, that have been used, for example, digital tools to engage citizens in government decision, to make them participate, to increase transparency. There is a topic as relevant as ever all over the planet. So can you tell us one or two very concrete examples that you maybe have experienced yourself that brought citizens of Taiwan close to their government and made them trust the institutions?
Okay. I would like to give the example of a platform in Taiwan, which name is V-Taiwan. Because in Taiwan, we have a lot of engineers and hackers. And a lot of engineers, actually, they are working with our government quite closely. And sometimes even in the civil society, we will hold some events spontaneously, like we invite engineers and hackers gather together, and we serve the society, some problems from the society, we provide it to them, and they will form it in small groups and come up with solution in 1 or 2 days. And this platform, V-Taiwan, was created from the hackathon of these engineer groups. And the ideas of V-Taiwan is that everyone in Taiwan can participate directly to our democracy and legislators' decisions. For example, if there are some controversial policies, and our government will put it on this platform for people to vote, or even citizens ourselves, we can raise any topics we want to make it legislated. If we want more public discussion about the topic we cares, we can raise it up on the platform. And there's a mechanism that you can provide your opinions, and also you can make some questionnaires, and they put people into different clusters. Like they separate which cluster you are based on your opinions of this policy. So I think the importance of this platform is that you can not only raise your voice on this platform, and also you can see very clearly what are the different opinions in the society. It has a very systematic way. You can, they analyze people's opinion very systematically. So you can try to convince people who has different opinions with you because they have some debate areas below the page. So I think it's kind of an interesting platform that I have only seen in Taiwan, and sometimes sometimes there are some big policies can really formed by citizens ourselves. For example, last year there was a big debate about if Uber is legal in Taiwan, because a lot of taxi drivers, they are complaining that the price of Uber is too cheap, then they cannot compete with the price of Uber. So because a lot of taxi driver has hold protest to it. So some people raise this problem, these questions up on the platform. So people has a lot of debates about if Uber should be legal in Taiwan on that platform. And at the end, I think people in the government get the consensus that Uber can still exist in Taiwan, but their price has to rise to the same level of our taxi. Yeah, so I think this is something interesting for me, and I hope this platform, this idea can also give some inspiration to you guys.
It
Yes.
definitely does, Mrs. Kuo. First of all, it's fascinating to hear what you have accomplished, bringing people together to discuss online is something that many democracies would need. And I have a very short follow-up question on this. So I come, for example, from a country, Italy, where only in 2021, after 10 years of legal battles, we were allowed to sign referendums online. That is because many governments are still allergic to digital means, do not have the right talents to implement digital solutions, and so on. And I'm also inspiring myself from the question I received on Zoom. How is it possible that Taiwan gets so much, cutting edge technology in government or close to government? Is it because people feel, I don't know, there's a status in working with the government on this topic? Is it because the government invests a lot of resources in it? Can you tell us a bit more about this?
Okay, I think the first reason might be we have a digital minister who is in charge of innovate our digital policy every year. And I think because she's a transgender, so I think she's the most, she got the most exposures within all the politicians in Taiwan. So people pay a lot of attention about what this digital minister, Audrey Tang, has talked about. In the past few years, and also I think the mindset or the distance between citizens and government are not so far in Taiwan, because everyone feel government is something close to us. Our voice can be heard. Just we have to use the right platform or use the right channels. Then yeah, I think because because the digital minister, she asked all the government sectors have to record all the meetings and put it on their websites to make it more transparent. Of course, not all the meetings, but meetings who can be published or be open should be recorded, or they have to have transcript and post it on website to let all the citizens know about what is happening in the government. So because of this, I think the distance between people and the government are not so far. And also we have many civil organizations. They go to the parliament every day to make record of what the politicians say. So we have very strong organization. They are watching the government, and also some organization, they are trying to build bridge between the government and the citizens. So this is why Taiwanese feel comfortable to communicate or to cooperate with the government.
Incredible. So it's a mix of culture, kind of tools and investment of the government, and leadership. I think these are the three things that it's clear that might lead result, and we should probably apply elsewhere. Thank you so much, Mrs. Kuo, for this explanation. I will now jump back to Andreas because I think that, I don't know if the connection is good. Can you hear me? I think I lost you. Yeah, perfect. Sorry about that. I was saying to Mrs. Kuo, just to recap, that I think culture, investments, and leadership are the three elements that were fleshed out through her answer. And I think you also said something that I want to bounce back to Andreas right now. There is the fact that how to make people feel close to government. And obviously, Andreas has a big dream. There's the one of having a more democratic global governance. And here, the first question would be, how do we make feel people feeling close to global institutions, global governments, global democracy? Because we already see, for example, in the European Union, there's not even a global institution, it's a regional one. There's been a lot of difficulties in involving citizens in the functioning of the institution. Maybe just the European elections were the best tools to facilitate that. So what's your take, Andreas, on this topic? How can we make people feel closer to a global governance? And how should this global governance look like?
Right. The question that you are putting forward is actually, I believe, a question that is relevant in democratic theory and practice in general, because there's been a lot of discussion for a long time about this, in how far, this connection between citizens and political institutions can be maintained, when at the same time the level of governance and the territory that is affected is becoming larger and larger. And you mentioned the European Union, and here we got the European Parliament that is supposed to, be that sort, provide that sort of connection through elected representatives between the constituents and this co-legislative body. We have talked very briefly about the European Citizens Initiative, which is the starting point of building this connection in the participatory field, the field of direct democracy. The other is representative democracy. And of course, the thing is that the larger the territory becomes, the weaker the link becomes as well. So there's been, in political science, there's been, arguments that at the global scale, with 7.8 billion people at this time, it is impossible to even have democracy, because it is too large. It's a too large group of people. It's too diverse, and culturally diverse, and politically diverse, and so on. However, from my perspective, as I have mentioned before in my intervention, I think we should look at democracy as a living organism, a social organism that we need to improve. And I don't think we can be satisfied with this verdict from political science that democracy, is something that works only in small groups. I think this is something that is really an intellectual roadblock in all of this, because we are dealing at this time with a planetary civilization, which is so apparent. I mean, it should be obvious with the pandemic that has now affected everybody and brought the world to a standstill for months, and climate change that has been debated for 30 years, if not longer, by governments, and where we can really see in all sectors, if you wish, how intergovernmental collaboration is essentially failing the people. And, climate change, in nuclear disarmament, in inequality, all these things. Today, they are no longer matters that can be dealt with at the national level. And that's the problem that we have, intellectually and politically. I believe that democracy has been confined to, and has been connected to the idea of a nation state. And that's really the big problem that we have to overcome. And think further, how do we improve democracy at the global scale? And I mean, that's exactly what we are doing. But I also think that democracy is a bottom-up process. And what I mean by saying this is that a sound global democratic system will have to be based on proper democratic practice at sub-levels, which addresses the problem that many people on this planet, actually a majority, they don't even have at their disposal proper democratic rights at home, locally, regionally, and in their nation state. There's no free speech, there's no free elections, and so on. So this means this is another roadblock that is stopping us from developing global democracy. And so the situation is that we have to realistically look at what can be done now. Nonetheless, although we recognize that we've got all these, imperfections and conditions that are, providing limitations, but in this environment that we have, I think we should recognize baby steps that are possible, and that's the things that we are working on. And I can elaborate more later if you wish, but at the same time, looking at democracy as an ongoing and slow process, actually, we also, that over 300 years has, the right to general suffrage has developed, and practices have developed that went beyond small groups like representative democracy and so on. But we also, at the global scale, I believe we should be open to the possibility of sudden surprises and windows of opportunities, because we are dealing here really with a geopolitical setup that can change quickly. We don't know the future. So although we are now working on baby steps, big leaps might be possible unexpectedly if the situation changes in certain countries, So that's, well, perhaps a starting point for this discussion.
No, I think that it's a very valuable reflection, and we know that we need big leaps ahead to make anything like this happen. And I want to jump on something that I've seen on Facebook and to ask Mrs. Kuo about it. There is technology, the relationship between technology and democracy, because obviously this could be one of the big leaps that Andreas mentioned, and that obviously social scientists 30 years ago could probably not imagine how technology would have evolved and would impact today, is impacting today democracy, right? So for you, Mrs. Kuo, as an advocate, an expert on digital diplomacy, and also living in a country, as we said, that is extremely ahead of our times in terms of like technology, the interconnection between technology and democracy. Do you think the overall technology is more of a threat or an opportunity for democracy? And how do you think technology is changing nowadays democracy?
Okay, I think technology has changed democracy for sure, but it has different sides. For example, some people might concern about disinformation because of the social media or technology. Many disinformation are on the internet now, but I also want to share that even there are some people talk a lot about disinformation, but the democracy is built on the trust of information. So we have to think about what are the information we can trust and then use technology carefully. And here are 4 points I want to mention about how technology changed democracy. The first point, it would be frequency. Because of the technology and also social media, it increased the frequency that we interact with our governments, and also increase the frequency we interact with people from other countries. I think it's a good thing because if you interact with each other more, it means your trust level are higher.
Yeah.
So democracy is built on the trust between government and civil society. So I think the frequent interaction is good. And the second thing I want to mention here is about formats. For example, you can see some memes or some infographic talking about policies, or sometimes make fun of politicians on internet. I think in the past, democracy is something very serious, and maybe just a group of people in the society would care about democracy. But now, because the creativeness or people trust democracy more, so they started to try some new formats talking about democracy. So the information format has changed a lot in the past decades. For example, you can see a lot of Twitter accounts a lot of Twitter accounts, they start to tweet some words that they just make comments about other countries' policies, or they just make comments on many things. That people can have their direct opinions on social media, and they can also participate in the creation of the opinion or their comments about those policies. And also, because of the format has changed, the effectiveness of people's communication or people's discussion has been improved as well. In the past, maybe if you want to receive some reply from the government, you have to send emails or you have to make a phone call. But now maybe you just make a comment below the social media post. I think the effectiveness of communication has been improved a lot because of social media and our technology. And also the efficiency has been improved as well, because the information, the cost of information producing has been lower than before. We don't have to be careful, and not to be careful, but we don't have to be so serious about all the announcement of policy, or because you can just make a social media post and simply explain about what is this policy about, or what is the purpose of this policy on social media. So I think the efficiency of communication also being improved as well. And in Taiwan, we usually receive message quite often from the government, because sometimes they want to announce new policy for the pandemic. Especially for the past 1 year, we receive a lot of messages, and our government also use the message as a tool to make sure that everyone has provide their information when you enter some places. But they make it a smart way, because the digital minister, she invented a system that you just have to send a message. You just have to scan a QR code before you enter a shop. And when you scan the QR code, your phone will send a message to the central information centers. It records your footstep of where you go. But after 3 days, it will be vanished. So not 3 days, maybe after 1 week, it will be vanished. So you don't have to worry about your information will be kept by the shop. But the government is taking care of the information in the center. So I think it's also a convenient way during the pandemic. You just have to scan QR code and you can go to everywhere.
It's very, very cool. So if I can recap, we meant the biggest trend that we see between technology and democracy is the frequency of the interaction between the governments and the people, kind of the popularization of democracy as well, because everyone has access to news and debates and updates on the democracy topics and politics. There's also a change in access. It's way easier to access public officials and interact with them. And finally, efficiency. And I mean, this last example you gave, it shows the power of technology in, for example, in battling pandemics. This is obviously something that we are learning how to use more and more across the planet, but it's very cool to hear that Taiwan is at the forefront of this. I want to now jump on to Andreas again, because I think that one of the questions I really wanted to ask you related to technology and democracy is, how do you see at the global level democracy advancing through technology? And I will also give you a personal perspective, something that we're working on at Atlas. We are studying very closely the concept of creating an e-nation. So a country that is fully digital, obviously right now wouldn't be recognized by most governments as a peer, but where people from all over the planet could join and exercise some of their civil rights and civil duties through technology, so like voting or receiving support or receiving a particular service. And if many people come join, this entity and this transnational digital state could actually start looking eye to eye other countries and influence their policies. Saying, Germany, why are you not when you still like investing so much on fossil fuel subsidies, all our citizens are against such policies. You should consider changing, kind of engaging in international digital diplomacy. And this is one way on how to kind of start making a global governance, a global democracy possible, alive, concrete for people all over the planet. So Andreas, what do you think about these and many other ideas, and how do you think technology can facilitate the creation of a global governance?
Well, first of all, since you mentioned your project and example, that's of course an excellent thing to do, an excellent project. And it also refers to the fact that, of course, digitalization, the internet, and your state-of-the-art ways of communication online lower the threshold of groups and individuals to make themselves heard and to collaborate and coordinate at the global scale. I think that is no question, including the activities of my own organization and the campaigns that we are moving forward. They would be virtually impossible like 15 or 20 years ago, because the level, the threshold of doing this digitally across borders was much higher. However, I would like to again introduce the idea that eventually what we would have to achieve to really democratize at the global scale is to establish proper and formal institutions and procedures that change the behavior and actions of governments and intergovernmental organizations directly. So I believe what you described as building a digital sphere of citizen collaboration and pressure advocacy eventually still aims at influencing governments. It's a way of building pressure, which is absolutely important. But unfortunately, the fact remains, unless we are talking about failed states, the fact remains that the national governments are in control of taxation. They are in control of economic redistribution and economic policy. They are in control of legislation and implementation of that legislation. And importantly, let's not forget, they are in control of the use of physical force. I mean, in theory, of the military and the police. So I believe what we want really is that this intergovernmental system as such is radically changed. And it is true that technology is a means to achieve that. However, insofar the intergovernmental system is concerned, as it is represented by the United Nations or the International Financial Institutions or intergovernmental negotiations, there is very little innovation here. Of course, digital diplomacy and bilateral, multilateral relations has become more important in the past 2 years, but the nuances of negotiations cannot be captured in digital, like this in a video kind of communication or digitally. So I think that in multilateralism, in-person meetings are extremely important and will remain important. And that's strongly felt, I believe, that's been strongly felt in the past 2 years when diplomats hadn't had a lot of opportunities to do that. And but speaking about formal structural changes, I think what we need to address is really in the first step only represented by governments. That's the problem here. And at the UN, for instance, as the main platform of international collaboration. And that's not even fully the case, because as we all know, many governments, they do not legitimately represent their people, because there are no free elections, because we are having absolutistic and authoritarian regimes that even in a genocidal way suppress their own people. But still they would sit at the UN, and by international law, represent those people they suppress. So, but even in a democracy, representation is really limited, because in a democracy, you know, you would assume there are elections and some parties, they manage to get the majority of the votes and end up forming the government. And that government, the executive, would then, you know, enter the international stage and do negotiations and so on. But I would like to ask the question, so what about the people who did not vote for the government? How are they represented? Even in democratic countries, they are not. They are just non-existent. So, and now I come finally to that project that we are working on, which is not a surprise to you, of course, but that's this idea of creating a parliamentary assembly. You know, a parliamentary kind of representation globally. And I mean, of course, in this connection of this discussion, we know that's imperfect. It's going to be imperfect. But following this logic that developing democracy is a bottom-up process, it would at least improve significantly the despotic, may I say that, the despotic dysfunctional system that we have now.
I think it's true. I think that while I would have a long discussion with you on other topics that you cover, like the relevance of technology, multilateralism, and so on, but I think this is not the right call, because we have 15 minutes till the end. I think that the point of having a parliamentary assembly in any international institution, obviously starting from the UN, but we could mention others, with true power and true relevance, would be very important for the development of the future of democracy, internationally and transnationally. I wanted to jump on the topic of Taiwan and their representation in the international institutions. However, I see many questions in the chat about Taiwan's approach to the pandemic, and basically the last example that Mrs. Kuo gave about the QR code, the data that people get, that the government get when people scan this QR code, and how Taiwan handled the pandemic. So I think I'm gonna divert there, because I really want our members to be involved in this conversation. So I think that if we look at Claudio's question in the chat, he's basically asking, basically outline the risk of privacy infringement and control from government to the citizens. And he mentioned how does Taiwan basically ensure the privacy of citizens and the security of their data? I suppose in this particular example, as in many others, as a highly technological government.
Okay, I think our government has used multiple ways to try to improve the relation between citizen and the government. And whenever the government or the citizens see the problem of the society, we have some communication channels that we can just throw the problem to each others. And I also want to share that I think the meaning of nonprofit organization or institutions like all of us is that we are filling the information gap between government and citizens, and also the information gap. By the information gap, I mean not only the problems in the society, but also what are the potential demands of people or potential demands from the government. We have to find it out and share the information with each other, because sometimes those platforms, those fancy platforms I've mentioned before, they only provide the opinions, which is very maybe some big society problems on the platform. But sometimes if you want to find out the potential demands of each side, you have to do more, for example, interview, or you have to do some research on both sides. So I think the meaning of nonprofit organization in democracy is to fill in the information gap. And how can we ensure the privacy of Taiwanese government who keep the data of our citizens? It also rely on the power of our media, our nonprofit organization, because everything is asked to be transparent, not 100%, but maybe 80% of the information from the government are requested to be transparent on all the sectors' websites. So there are some nonprofit organizations, they are watching this, and if they have some concerns about the privacy, I mean, if the government has violated the privacy of citizens, they will raise it up directly. And also, Taiwanese people are very into writing articles on medias. I don't know why, but has a lot of opinions to talk. So I think it's from the cultures that we believe that we have a group of people are fighting for our rights, and the government also, they are very aware of how citizen or this nonprofit organization will react to their decisions. So it's a culture cultivated for a long time, and both sides, the government and the citizens, both sides, they have respect each other. They respect each other, and also they know how their decision or their movement will influence each other's trust or each other's behavior. So I think what we can share here maybe is the connection or the information flow of our civil society and also the government. Because if someone finds something wrong, I mean, because I'm in the club of, I know most of the Taiwanese nonprofit organization, and if someone finds something is wrong, everyone will know about it in 1 week. So I think the information flow in Taiwan is very open. So under this situation, like we have trust with each other and also have trust with the government. Yeah.
Fantastic. So a vibrant civil society can be very helpful on this. I want to ask you another question, Ms. Kuo, because as I said before, this was a detour coming from the question in the chat. Very, very useful explanation. Thanks for that. But I think that going back to the topic of global governance, the one we're discussing with Andreas, obviously Taiwan had a lot of difficulties in accessing international institutions, and we all know why. China's very, very authoritarian regime in the UN and elsewhere is preventing Taiwan from fully partaking into international sphere. So my question for you is, what do you wish for the future of global governance and global democracy? Apart from obviously Taiwan accessing these, it shouldn't be a club, it should be like a universal.
You can club.
But
yeah,
what's your hope in this sense?
Yeah. You mentioned like my wish for global governance might be we will find more alliance in the world, not only for democracy, maybe for many other issues as well. And I hope there will be more information exchange or communication happen, just like this event now will happen more frequently in the future. And because I think the information exchange can help each other to improve our society together, and also to improve our policies and also some small solutions for our society's problems. And for future democracy, we are looking forward to have more alliance. As a Taiwanese, we want more alliance because we are kind of excluded by all the international organizations. And but I see something is changing in the past 1 year. For example, Milk Tea Alliance. Milk Tea Alliance is a alliance formed by Thailand, Hong Kong, and Taiwanese young people. And it was the first time there is an alliance on the internet who include Taiwan spontaneously, because before we always want to join others, the international organization was rejected. But in the past 1 year, because of people, maybe because of the reputation of China is decreasing a bit. So some different voices from other countries who is not agree with China's policy, they start to raise up. For example, some people from India or some people from Southeastern Asia, they started to have different voice because in the past decades, everyone follows China's policy in Asia, but in the past 1 year, something's changing. We can feel that on social media, and I think Milk Alliance is a good example to explain how people start to find alliance to fight for everyone's democracy or fight for their common interest together.
It makes a lot of sense. I mean, inclusivity and creating networks outside of your country, I think, is the future of many democratic and not only, as you said, struggles for our planet. And on a positive note as well, I think that the Taiwanese reputation as a cradle of democracy is also growing in Europe, in North America. I have experienced that, like how in 1 year, I think also because of the pandemic, many started looking at Taiwan in a different way, learning more about the country. So I hope that this positive trend will continue, because I think it's fundamental for the many million people in Taiwan, as many as the billion people around the world. In this sense, I want to also add one small thing, is that, as you know, Mrs. Kuo, we wanted to host this Freedom Marathon in Taiwan originally, but because of the pandemic, we could not do it. So our physical event will be in London. But I can promise here on record in front of the audience that we'll try again next year. If the situation will allow, we will be in Taiwan celebrating democracy together.
Next year.
I hope that we're going to be able. To close this wonderful event, let me drive back the conversation to Andreas from Germany. Andreas, what's your hope for the future of democracy? We have discussed about technology, global governance, involving citizens. You have worked on democracy many years. I don't know if your whole life, but certainly many years. So what's your hope for the future of democracy? How do you want your kids, nephews, nieces to vote in 30 years in a democratic government?
Well, I mean, my hope would be really that all people on the planet will be able to exercise their right to democratic participation and representation. I believe it's a universal right that applies everywhere. I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind, and that this right can be exercised at all levels of government that exist, and that is from the local to the subnational, national scale today in democracies, but that it would extend to other levels of government as well, which we have at the regional level in Africa, Europe, and elsewhere, regional integration processes, but eventually that we would have a true global democracy that gives every citizen a say on the planet about the future of humanity and affairs that affect all of humanity. We need to keep in mind that we are now really in a very crucial time at which I believe the future, for me, look at the grave challenges in front of humanity, like the climate crisis primarily, and this really makes it necessary. Even if it's a universal right in principle, there is also a necessity that we really do this leap forward, and that's my hope, that will happen, and that major countries on the planet that we talked about a bit today, that they would democratize as well from the inside, so that there would be a real geopolitical breakthrough for global democracy to develop.
Thank you so much, Andreas. Very clear message. Democracy should flourish, and we really hope it will, because I think it's our best chance to improve our planet, to live a happy and free life. I'm saying we, but I think there are many people that both whole countries, as you mentioned, but also minority group in certain countries are completely excluded from democratic exercise and most basic rights. Just before closing, I also want to give Mrs. Kuo a chance to send a last message, because first it was my previous question was about Taiwan, so I don't know if Mrs. Kuo, you want to give a final message about democracy to our audience, about the future of democracy, and then I will wrap up the session.
Okay. I want to mention again a point I talked about at the beginning. Because of the global environment has become more and more complicated and unpredictable. So I think my hope for the future is that we can work together with global citizens, that we can work together and cooperate more to find out the solutions for our changing environment and stay together and and pursue a better future together. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Kuo. Very clear, and I hope to the heart of all our audiences. So thank you so much for joining this wonderful panel. We are now 1 minute away from the end of this event. And I want to tell you that for me, it's been incredibly informative, and I bet for the many people following us on social media, as well as the selected audience on the Zoom call, I think the ability to connect the experience, the incredible experience of a new democracy like Taiwan with the dream of a global governance crossing oceans and mountains and barriers, it's wonderful. It's exactly what we need. We need innovation. We need to think big. We need to bring technology from the best practices that we experience in some places on this planet to the hands and the laptops and the cell phones of people all over the planet, to connect them, to create this global democratic space that we really hope is going to develop in the next decades. Because as I mentioned before, it might be our best opportunities to advance our society. Personally, if I can add a final reflection, I think that in these ages, in this time, we are witnessing a struggle between democracy and the authoritarian model. And I think that the only way we can prevail as people that love democracy and love all the fundamental rights linked to this concept is by binding our resources, our forces together. Because authoritarian countries are extremely efficient. They do not fear internal dissent. They do not fear electoral cycles. They do not fear to look bad in the eye of the world. And so, as people in love with democracy, in love with the possibility of exercising our freedom, we need to fight back. And to fight back, unity is the secret. Because by showcasing that people from all over the world with different cultures, religions, hopes and fears can come together and show that democracy is strong, is the future. It can give a better life to people, even those under dictatorship, under authoritarian regimes. Hopefully will find the energy, the support, the strength to stand up and dismantle the system of power that is keeping them down low and without those rights that I think all human beings should be able to exercise. So with this hopeful message and a call to action to our audience, I just want to highlight that in 1 hour, we're going to start a workshop where we're going to actually bring volunteers together to discuss the topics we will cover. So how to innovate democracy and isolate key actions, key policies, key campaigns that Atlas as an organization can bring forward together with all our network of partners. So join us in 1 hour. Colom should share the link on the Zoom chat to connect to the event. You probably also received it via email a few hours ago. I hope to see you there. I hope we're going to think together on how to best innovate democracy. Thank you, Andreas. Thank you, Mrs. Kuo. It's been an incredible experience to be here with you.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.